Irreverent, entertaining, cool. You're listening to LA Talk Radio.
You're listening to Get Yourself the Job with Jennifer Hill and Brandon Maslan, only on LA Talk Radio.
Well, happy pre-election week, everyone. It's so great to have you here with us for this show, a non-political, nonpartisan show. But today, actually, the topic we're going to dive into, we were laughing before we just went live, is so apropos for this week. It's about how do you bring levity and lightness to your work, to being a leader, and why that matters in business. Why is that possibly the key to success? So before we dive into today's topic, I want to thank you for tuning in today to Get Yourself the Job with Brandon and I. We're so lucky to get to host this and have these amazing guests on. So today it's going to be the two of us exploring this topic. And before I want to hand it over to Brandon, I want to thank our sponsors, the people over at Markham Search LLC. Markham Search offers premier professional recruiting services throughout the United States. So please do keep them in mind for all of your recruitment needs. Now, Brandon, that's about as serious as we're going to get today, right?
Hopefully, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. We were just talking about that everything does feel heavy in the world right now, a week before election, Supreme Court justice, all the things that are going on, even as apolitical, if we try to keep the show apolitical, it's heavy. It's very, very heavy. So we're going to try to keep it light, which is good.
You can. We'll have fun.
It's funny because I was telling you that story the other day, and politicians actually do this really well. They, good politicians do this well, where they use levity to break the tension in a positive way. And I was saying that one of my favorite stories about Reagan was that right after he had been shot, he was getting rolled into the ER, and if he was going to live or die. And he looks up at his doctors right before they put him under. And he says, "I just hope you're all Republicans." I think that's a great joke. And so when he woke up, and it's something we can do for loved ones too, because they worry about us, right? In many ways, we worry about our loved ones. And I do love that story where then he came out and they had survived the surgery. And Nancy was sitting by his bedside looking terrified and ashen. And he looked over and goes, "I should have ducked," which I just think is also a great way to break the tension. And, injecting levity into the heaviest of times and humor in particular. And you see politicians do that well, and you see leaders do that well in business. And I think one of the things in the service of Get Yourself the Job in interviews, if you can find an appropriate moment to do that in an interview, you'd be amazed at how often that will get you the job.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's so important that we know when to pivot. One of my favorite stories of it is of a job seeker who was interviewing with a CEO who said, "I'm going to yell at you, and how are you going to handle it?" And she just laughed and she said, "Well, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to walk down the hallway, I'm going to sit back down, and I'm going to let you finish yelling at me." And he just looked at her, he's like, "Fine, you're hired." And sure enough, about 2 weeks into the job, he starts yelling at her. And what did she do? Exactly what she said. She stood up, walked down the hall, walked back, and then he stopped yelling because he just started cracking up. And I think that's one of the things that we don't realize how important humor is we have natural default ways of being. We have natural default ways that, oh, I have to be serious about this. And it's some people, their default way is humor, and that's okay, but it's also an opportunity for us to grow when we insert something, and it can make you a great leader too. It can make you a great colleague, a friend, as long as you do it in moderation, just like anything else.
Yeah, I think there's that whole adage of class clown, but even then, what's the worst thing that happens? You become a comedian? I don't know. I mean, moderation in all things, but which goes for being too serious all the time. And there's some good studies that show when you're serious all the time and you're dour and you're intense, that tends to ruin productivity. It tends to make people afraid. It tends to make people walk on eggshells. You don't want that. You want employees. You want, this breath of fresh air. To honor that, I actually looked up some good jokes. I know you're always traveling. We can play Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego or Jen Hill. Where are you this week, Jen? Are you in Portugal?
Lisbon. Just arrived to Lisbon.
Of course. So not Paris, not, so. But I don't know if you've been to Switzerland, but do you know the best thing about Switzerland? I
What,
don't know
what,
either, but the best thing about Switzerland, it's just like, there's rhetorical questions when you do jokes. It's not really, it's like a lawyer, you know, I'm asking a question, but I know the answer. So I don't know. It's how humor works. So but if you do know, is it interlocking? Because that's what I think too. I mean, you know, the
oh my
skiing is great. But like, let's try this again. All right. So
God.
don't
Go
say
again.
anything. All right, rewind. All right, let's try it one more time. That was amazing. What's the best thing about Switzerland? Oh, you don't know? Okay, great. I don't know either, but the flag is a big plus.
Oh my God. Bum, bum, bum.
That's how banter works. I actually like this one because one of our best friend's kids is a big like math wizard genius. Did you hear about the mathematician who's afraid of negative numbers? And you could say no, like that would be good. Like, no, they could
No.
lead me. Let's try it. No. Oh, well, funny enough, he'll stop at nothing to avoid them. All right, that's banter.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. See, it's so funny. Sometimes I can be so on, and somebody calls me literal lady. Like I have this thing where my brain, I would miss jokes. They would go right over my head. I don't know
Yeah.
because I have Asperger's or whatever, but my brain just goes literal. And then sometimes everybody else is laughing and I'm taking something literally. And so you have to learn how to roll with the punches. Is somebody kidding? What's going on? I did not mean to illustrate that.
No, I loved it. I loved it. Are you kidding me? That's my version of humor. I love it. We even rehearsed, by the way, before this, that I was going to say that joke. So the fact that it just imploded is that brings me a certain amount of joy. I needed that laugh today. Thank you. Yeah, my mother didn't get sarcasm either, and I'm a very sarcastic person. You know, this is actually, you bring up a great point though about the importance of actually knowing your humor, because one thing that I have is, and this is the East Coaster in me, a very dry sense of humor. And if you can see my face, I know a lot of people actually are going to be listening to this. Most people are listening to this, a lot of people over the radio or over our phones, whatever it might be, the old timey radio, but over the phones, whatever else they're using. And my humor is a lot of times I'm facial because I do dry humor. So I'll kind of say something sarcastic, but then make a face. And what would happen a lot of times is I would do these big trainings for, I don't know, let's call it 400 people, but only 100 would be in the room. And I would get back the reviews and they were like, great, he's funny. And then there'd be like 20 people in Des Moines who hated me. And they're like, he said this and he said this, and that is, I can't believe it. And I was like, that was a joke. That wasn't, oh my God, yes, if I said that, then yes, I am a monster. But that's why everyone laughed. And I was like, oh, my humor. And that was something I've worked on over the years. If I'm doing a virtual training and you can't see me, I've tried to adjust to that. But I tend not to make off-color jokes because God forbid someone actually thinks I'm being serious.
I think it's a great point though that you bring up, Brandon, is knowing your audience though and learning to break the tension in the room in some way, because you walk into an interview and the sooner that you can get them laughing with you, smiling with you, that's where you have this camaraderie, this sense of, kind of unity. And, if somebody laughs with you, it's like, oh, I feel comfortable with you. And I know I tend to I shut down and I get serious. Like my natural side is I love to just laugh and be silly, etc. But if I go in my head, I'm less likely to pick up a joke or to be present in the moment. Or actually, I don't know if this is true for any of you tuning in out there. Sometimes if I go into my head and I'm not available for laughing at jokes, it's because I'm in judgment phase. And then there's also kind of a barrier. It puts some sort of wall up inadvertently between yourself and the other person. And if you think, Steve Jobs, I think is a great example of this. Like when you think of Steve Jobs, and if anybody out there has ever read his autobiography, I loved it years ago. I remember reading it. And he's not necessarily the funny guy. He's like accidentally funny because he's more ironic funny. And he was a great leader in many ways, but also had many of his flaws and had many people who said, oh, he was very hard to work with. And so I'm trying to think, Brandon, who would you say, Ronald Reagan, I think, is a great example of somebody who used humor as a way to be a leader and still be accessible and keep himself kind of down to earth. Are there any other great examples that you can think of leaders who have used humor in business or otherwise?
Well, I mean, again, it's funny that you use, again, Reagan, but politicians do this great. I mean, again, Bush was funny. I always use the example of Bush and Clinton because both sides of the aisle, the other sides, they hated them. But when they got in person, most people liked them. And because they brought a certain amount of levity, they didn't take themselves too seriously. You know, and I think there's something to that. So I do think of politicians. You know, I was not, you know, full disclosure, the biggest Bush 2 fan in the world, but you know, the guy makes me laugh when he's making a good joke. He had a great one where he was telling Michelle Obama that when the British invaded originally, the one thing that they saved was George Washington. The second time I think it was maybe the Confederates were raiding, but they tried to save George Washington's picture. And he turned to her and he goes, now, forget that, GW, save mine. I just like that joke. It's a good, and if you watch actually the Bushes and the Obamas communicate now, they all laugh. And that's actually something to think about in politics. You want to see a picture that's making the rounds right now? It's both Bushes, it's Obama, it's Clinton, it's Carter sitting around in a circle and laughing. And so I think that's something, we live in such politically times, and just God almighty, we get it. You're this, I'm this, who cares? Just let's laugh together. Let's break the tension. So politics. In business, yeah, I mean, look, I've said in a lot of keynote speeches, my favorite brand of humor really is the people who just don't take themselves too seriously. You know, that are just there and you could tell are just having a good time. If you're having a good time, your audience is going to have a good time. If you're a leader and you're having, and look, it's not all fun, right? There's chaos, there's wars, there's in business, there's mergers and acquisitions, there are all kinds of things. But you know, I thought about this today. You know what the best, really the best general counsels have in common? The best ones I know in the world, I know a few of them, they all have humor. Every last one of them is a funny person. In some core way, they are funny. Maybe not intentionally, but they're funny. And the worst ones are just such not distinguished. You know, I don't know what else I was going to go there for. But like the point is, like, that's it. I don't have anyone. Do you in business? I don't have an example though. That's famous.
What occurred to me that I think is so important in this conversation, Brandon, that I just got is what you're saying is we all have different perspectives, right? One person might be Republican, another person might be Democrat, another person might be another party. No right or wrong or good or bad. What just occurred to me though is when we laugh together, like the political example you just gave, there's something where we are all agreeing upon something in that moment. And I just kind of saw this whole vision as you're talking about that, where everybody thinks that it should be this way, it should be that way, and we're very stuck and righteous in our position. And when you come to a joke or something like a lightness or something that people can gather and laugh about, there's this sense of no matter what direction you're looking at, kind of, I imagine this fire, like we're all sitting around roasting marshmallows. There's a sense of commonality and finding that thing that you can agree with others. And I think in business and an interview, you know, I remember I had a gentleman years ago go in for an interview with the general counsel of a major company. And he looked around the interview room and the guy's office, and he happened to see like his favorite sports team. And it wasn't a joke per se, but what he did is like, oh, you know, how about them Bears? I don't follow sports, but like whatever the analogy was. And they just start laughing and talking about how the quarterback, I don't even know if I'm speaking the right sport, but, you know, they started talking about that. And then all of a sudden they had a common background. And I think that in and of itself is why it's so important to have the ability to relate to one another more than anything else. And business, Brandon, I remember very clearly, I can't remember the gentleman's name. I remember the conference I was at in Orange County. There was an ex-comedian who is now a business speaker. And one of the key takeaways that from that particular talk that he gave is he said, you know, in my life as a comedian, what I realized is the yes and game of improv. So for those of you tuning in who might not be familiar with this principle, in an improv scene, if you've watched Saturday Night Live or maybe some old improv skits, the person who's in the skit has to play yes and. Whatever the other person just said, it didn't matter if they said there's a purple pizza eater with blue balloons flying around, then the next person has to say, yes, and that person is riding around on a tricycle in their underwear, whatever it is. And I remember in this business course that he gave, he said, in business, if we can all learn to play this yes and improv game, and one of my old team members, really great guy, much like me, he could be very literal, and things would be very much like, it is this way, or it's not this way. And I would tell him, I said, let's play yes and. So even if we had two diametrically opposed perspectives, one of us would say yes and whatever we had to say next had to be yes and rather than no but. And because of that, we had one of the best working relationships because it was always looking for the fun. And sometimes either one of us would wind up giggling at how like diametrically opposed we were about something. And yet we had to play yes and come up with a way that we could both come to an agreement on it. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. And I think that's, it's important in the boss-employee relationship. It's important in the coworker relationship. That's one of you want to make a lifelong friend as a coworker, but, make your coworkers laugh, especially if you're working in a company. You don't want to, if it's not a good environment, the more you can bring levity to your coworkers, that's great. I think that goes for boss employees as well. I think anytime that you can inject an inside joke in particular into it, the longer it lasts. It's why inside jokes don't translate that well, by the way. As I like, I've given, I don't know, something like 7 best man speeches. It's called 5 best man speeches to officiate 2 weddings. I tend not to tell inside jokes because no one in the room thinks they're funny, right? I try to make it universal. What can we all laugh at? And so you got to find that. I love what you talked about. That's so beautiful. The commonality that we all want to laugh. It's in us. We just do. We want to be lighter. We want to find humor. We were talking about the Borat movie, which is cringeworthy, but he tries to inject humor into cringeworthy situations. And God, it's it's an old quote, right? If I wasn't laughing, I'd surely be crying. And crying has its purpose too. We can talk about that in another episode. But yeah, no, I find that to be wonderful. And one thing though I've seen wielded poorly is I'd worked for, and we talked about, and this isn't just humorous. And I used to have I've had a few bosses in my lifetime where anytime they were going to deliver bad news, they would try to like be light and funny. And that was the only time. And I was like, just give me whatever the bad news is. What are you doing? I was a recruiter at the time and they were cutting commission. I was like, just save the joke. Just tell me the part where you're taking away our money, or tell me the part where you're laying off first staff, or whatever it is. I don't need the joke, right? There's a time for humor. And that's what annoys me. It's not, it should just be to serve the collective commonality, to serve the good. One thing that's very important to know, authentic humor versus inauthentic humor. One of my favorite, I'm a big authenticity person. Authentic humor is universal. You're talking about yourself to some degree. You're being sarcastic about yourself, or you're just making general observations, very Seinfeld, if you will. Do you notice when? Inauthentic humor is mean-spirited and directed at someone. And this is somewhat of the problem of the political discourse. Go on Facebook, go on any social media sites and watch the humor. It's such, it's like, haha, I hurt them. God, it's inauthentic. You're just trying to cause pain and you're calling it humor. Don't. If you want lightness, levity, universality, bring us together. Don't drive us apart. It's so sad to me. I know on a political bent, but week before the election, it is a devastating fact that the press dinner that they have every year in the White House isn't a thing, because it's the one time in the year where Democrats and Republicans get together and laugh at one another. It is so important. And if you can't handle being laughed at, you are a joke. Sorry.
I think what you just touched on, Brandon, there was something that came to me when you were saying, have you ever blah, blah, blah. And it made me think of many of the classes that I've done on leading a business meeting, or even if you're going into an interview. This is where a lot of people might have an opportunity for growth in an interview. Let's say you go into an interview, and I'm not saying you necessarily start with a joke in an interview, but you say, hey, Have you ever had the experience, like, what's the pain point? What's the thing that we can all agree upon? And same thing if you're doing a speaking engagement, whether it's for 5 people or 500 or 1,000, you want to create that sense of commonality. Hey, have any of you ever had that frustrating sense where you walk into a room and nobody's aligned and you can like feel the tension in the air? Have you ever had that? And it's funny, just by asking that, have you ever had that experience, whether it's in a speaking engagement, in a business meeting, or even in an interview? Imagine that you walk into an interview and you say, gosh, have you ever had that experience where, let's say you're applying for a managerial role, where half your team turns over in the month and you have to spend all that time and energy recruiting new people? It sucks, right? And you get people to say yes. It's funny. I didn't mean to talk about this today, Brandon, but it all comes back to like the saying the yes thing. Like, how can we get the mutual yes? And when we come to a mutual yes, we can laugh together, we can lead together, we can play together, but the mutual yes makes all things possible. And from there, you can build a foundation and build this amazing castle of yeses that creates a great organization.
No, but just kidding. Yes, and the no, yes, and I love that. Again, anyone who's listening to this and are interviewing for a job as a CEO or they're interviewing a job as an intern, that commonality you're talking about, finding those alignments. I was a weird recruiter back in the day when I was a recruiter, because I was like, go be you, horrifically. The only thing I don't want you to talk about is why did you leave your last job? Don't bash the old employer, and don't spend all your time talking about what you did. Talk about what you're going to do. Find that commonality, because that's what matters to them. They don't care what you did. To some degree, they do. They're going to care about what you're going to do. And legal recruiting, it mattered a little more. And in tech, it matters because you have the skill set. But we just want to work with people that we get along with, we connect with, we can frankly laugh with. I love this. I heard this it was actually an interview I did in between recruiting and coaching. And someone said, I got to the end and I basically was like, well, this was good for me. How was it for you? And he said, I look at my clock almost always. And it's a guy that's all he does all day, every day, interviews new hires. And he said, I always look at my clock and I think, how long does this hour feel? I love that. I love that from an interview perspective. You should, as an interviewer, you should think for yourself, actually, how long did that hour feel? If it flew by, say yes to that job. If it felt like forever, it probably felt like that for them too. And it might not be the job. I mean, it goes back to, it's my whole joke about dating. I sometimes, it's sort of, don't tell me what you want, tell me what you don't want, because what you want someone who's good looking and makes you laugh, duh. What can't you handle, but if someone makes you laugh and they're good looking, then they're probably good. Just make sure that they check off the don'ts. I don't know. It's, I just love dating advice that relates to work. It just makes me happy inside. We waste so much time in our life going, I could have told you that wasn't the person. We all knew that wasn't the person. We just, come on, just hurry it up. And that's true in our careers. We spend so much of our life going, I'm going to make this job work. No, you're not. You're just not, go through the pain, convince yourself. But as I like to say to my clients, call me if you ever quit your job, get fired, or get divorced. I know divorce has nothing to do with your job, but I'll say congratulations, because no one has ever left their dream job or dream person. And what we do is we pretend that we think that we remember what the job was. It happens all the time with companies that go from private to public, and they change with shareholders. This happens with marriages, unfortunately. People get older and they change. And we remember this mythology that just doesn't exist. If we could just let it up and be like, oh, well, that sucks. Good run. Heck of a run, I know it sounds intense, but, I was a domestic lawyer. If I couldn't bring levity in domestic, God, enough people are crying already.
You just brought up something so important that I know we're joking about weddings, marriages, past significant others or jobs. Although what I realized is if you can see your history, no matter what it is, through a filter of levity, you just have shifted everything. You've shifted how you're going to occur in the interview. You've shifted how you're going to be in that job. Because think about it, any of us where we've had a marriage, a job, whatever it is, and when we start talking to somebody about it, it's painful for the other person to hear about it, right? Oh, my boss, he was such a jerk, or she was so evil and she did this to me. And it's like an energy vampire. It's like an emotional vampire where the person's going and sucking out all your energy. And you're like, I don't want to work with that person. I don't want to be with this person. And this goes for once you're hired in the job too. And one of my favorite things that I would coach job seekers on is when you're talking about why you left a job, and the same goes for a marriage or anything, a business meeting you might be in, is to not make something significant. Use good, bad, good. Lightly touch on why you left the job or the marriage or whatever you might be talking to somebody about. So start off with a good, when I first joined this job, I was super excited. I loved the team that was there. It was super dynamic. And unfortunately, they went through some turnover and changes. It just wasn't the right fit. And what I learned from that was X and Y. Think of how much you love to be around those people, or even somebody who makes light or makes a friendly joke, not a poking, trying to cause harm to another person, but a light-spirited joke about it, and says, hey, I may have gone through 5 or 10 years of a bad marriage, bad job, whatever it was, and not even labeling it bad, I went through an experience. And what I learned from that is X, Y, or Z. That helps us all to shift our perspective.
Absolutely. And I think you bring up a great point. I think also when you leave these bad marriage, bad jobs, who understands it? Either the person was in a marriage with you or the person was in a bad job with you. I mean, I often refer to bad jobs as like Fight Club. Like don't talk about Fight Club outside of Fight Club, because no one lived that. They might have shared experiences, but they don't know your fight. Call your old employees and be like, oh my God, I'm in this cycle today. And they'll get you out of it. But in general, no one wants to hear about your horrible situation. They want to hear about maybe a shared pain. I mean, don't get me wrong, vulnerability, Brene Brown, bring your pain, bring your vulnerability, bring your anger if you need it. There's a time and place, but leaving it behind, putting that baggage down as best you can. And sometimes that's why people don't heal. They don't ever go back and look at it. They just pretend it's gone. It's not. It's going to catch up to you. It's there. It's always following behind you. So the more you look at it, the more you turn it over in all of its ways. You know what it feels like to hurt. Turn it feel like what it feels like to laugh at it. When I did that recently with forgiveness, I had a lot of anger around my mother's death over a decade ago to a lot of people, and realizing one thing, that they couldn't probably do better. They had their own pain. They were in their own thing. But also like realizing, and I hate to say this, but how many of them are just ridiculous people? Like a decade later, they're ridiculous. What am I doing? What am I waiting for? What is this magical thing? It's like, but so was I. I was whatever. I was a kid, really. But, that's the other thing we do to ourselves, by the way. We beat ourselves up as long as you didn't cause actual harm to someone. Don't take yourself so seriously. It was one of the best lessons I ever got, by the way. Came out of a wedding. This is such a Brandon thing, neurotic as I am. And I was so stressed out. And the mother of one of my friends like, Brandon, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, it's just, I was at the wedding last night. I didn't say goodbye to the bride's mother. And I didn't say thank you to the groom. And the thing was like the groom, the bride. I just, Brandon, they're not thinking about you. You are not that important. Best advice I've almost ever got in my entire life is, Brandon, you are not that important. At 26, 27, I thought I was. God, I love how not important I am. People are not thinking about us. They're not worried about us. They're not spending their time. But yet you spend all your time worrying about them. It's such a waste. Ugh.
Yeah, live the best. That's such a beautiful story, Brandon. I love that, because how many times in our life do we suffer about an old boss, an old colleague, a wrong that we think was done to us, or a wrong that we imagine we may have done to another person, and talk about it's so funny. It's like this drama. It's more of a soap opera than anything else, right? And when you just laugh at it, when you can just have a little giggle at yourself, my analogy I like to think of is when something goes awry, when something doesn't go the way I intend, whether it's in a business meeting or you trip and fall, whatever, I imagine fist bumping the universe. Just imagine the next time that you trip and fall, you fall flat on your face in an interview, in a business meeting, in some scenario, you just laugh and go, what a great opportunity for my growth and development right now. This is just something that I needed to learn. And I think part of the reason, Brandon, you and I were talking of one of many reasons of doing today's show is I've had the message 3 times in the last week from all of different teachers and sources saying, I need to stop taking myself so seriously. I want you to imagine out there. So I work with a vocal coach named Arthur Joseph, and he was watching a clips video. So on my @JenHillSpeaker on Instagram, I'll do clips videos sometimes with job hunting. And he just started laughing. He said, Jen, you're saying a blah, blah, blah. Go tell job seekers to do a thing. He's like, you need to say I'm like, what, Arthur? What are you talking about? Why would I say instead of a? You're a vocal coach. That makes no sense. And he said, Jen, because you're formal. You're always trying to get things right. He said, fall on your face, make mistakes, be real. And I think that ties into this whole episode and what we're talking about today. Be authentic. If I sit here and if I get every word right and I don't say any ums or ahs, yes, you might think, oh, Jen's speaking eloquently, but you're not going to relate to me. You're not going to share this with your friends. You're not going to say, oh, she's cool. But if Brandon or I, we screw up, we might not say the right things. We laugh at ourselves. We might make a faux pas or two. That's where you're like, oh, they're human beings. Because I think that's what makes great leaders. That's what makes great colleagues. That's what makes great friends, is to know that you can screw up, get crap all over your face, and then laugh at your friends, laugh at yourself, laugh at the situation, and not take yourself seriously.
One of my favorite things on earth to do is get around the people I love the most and have them make fun of me. I mean, it just brings me a joy because I do take myself too seriously. I mean, it's that pressure of being a young lawyer. It's a pressure of being a bullied kid. It's a pressure of life. And God, I love being, I mean, I'm just had to cancel a trip home because of someone, my family got COVID back east. And I was finally going to go home. And I'll tell you the thing that hurts me most, I just don't get to laugh at my dad. And he's my favorite person. We worked together right before I got out of law. I was joking around that that's what helped me get out of law. But I worked with my dad, and you know what we stopped doing? Laughing. It was horrible. I thought it would be great for our relationship. It was horrible because we stopped laughing. It wasn't fun anymore. And we didn't want to hang out after work. We didn't want to talk. It was just like, do this thing. You know, now we laugh. You know, you mentioned so many important points about not taking ourselves too seriously, or the A's and the ums. I love the mess. I love in a good interview, knock over a desk, fuck up. Like, who cares? Who cares? I'm weird, but I don't think you can, just like I don't think you can leave the dream job or dream person, I don't think you can screw up the dream job or dream person. I don't. I mean, unless you do something really bad, they're still going to love you. If anything, they're going to know you more quicker. You know, my wife, second day we ever had, I got cold medicine. I was coughing. I was stopped on our way of our second date to get cough medicine. The first date, this is within the end of our date was, I told a friend that I was going to go on one date in my life and not try to kiss the person. And I just couldn't. She was too beautiful. So I tried. And she was so confused at what I was doing because I told her I wasn't going to kiss her the whole date. And I got full nose, all nose. And then I tried to kiss her again and I just slammed my face in her. And the last thing I heard on the end of our first date was the doors closing of the elevator and her hysterically laughing at me. The next time I pick her up, I stop to say, we're still going to go on a date, but I got to get cold medicine. That should be it in any universe. And, this is she laughs at me. She laughed at me last night. She thinks I'm ridiculous. And I am. I love it. I don't want to take myself seriously. I don't. One thing that I think is so important, though, that is one of the greatest lessons I ever heard was from Harold Klorman. Most of you will not know who he is, but he's one of the greatest playwrights in history. And he says, it's not his amazing successes. It's not his, Tony Award-winning plays. It's the flops. It's the manure. He talks like an old Joe. He's like a manure, the flops. I love it. You live in the manure. You go in the manure. You give me the flop. Give me the shit. Because out of that, the blossoms grow. And it's just like, God, we should all be like an old Jewish playwright from New York looking at our life going, oh, this beautiful mess I made. It gave me this. I mean, I don't know. Not everyone can do a weird East Coast accent.
That was so perfect though, Brandon. I love what you just shared. Think of the story you just shared about your wife, Erin, and about the playwright. What he shared is it's those moments where we get egg all over our face, where we just slip, we fall, we make a mess of our life or our situation. those are the teachable moments. Those are the moments that you share about an interview, that you use to lead, hundreds, thousands of people in an organization, because you share your humanity. You share that, I don't always make the best decisions. Imagine that you had this cookie cutter leader or interviewer who is like an automatron who always got everything exactly right. You don't want to work with that person. You want to work with somebody who you can have a laugh with. And it's not to say you want to be yourself. I love what you shared, Brandon, about not trying to impress people. You want to be your authentic self and know that if somebody doesn't hire you, or God forbid they fire you, or it doesn't work out with that person, trust that it is for your good and that you are being guided. Many times in my career where I've made a mistake and I screwed something up that I thought I just couldn't, it was irreparable, it led to the greatest experiences. And those are the stories that we share. They're the stories of buying cold medicine on a second date, or the times that we completely, tripped and fell, literally or figuratively, in front of our CEO or team. And that's where you get to have fun.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, that's usually the good sign, right? In these jobs that we see with I mean, you've placed thousands of people in your career as a recruiter.
Yeah.
When those people would call you and say, and they were not having fun anymore, I wonder if that wasn't, were those the signs that you just knew it was over? I mean, how did you know when a placement was wrong around the idea of levity?
It's a great question, Brendan. I think that it's not necessarily that you want to throw in the towel, because think of all the relationships we have in our lives, our friends, our family, our bosses, our colleagues. You're going to have friction. Friction and upset and not having fun in that moment doesn't mean that you throw the baby out with the bathwater. It means that there's something, you know what it goes back to, Brandon, just take it back full circle. It means that there's something that we are not agreeing on. There's some yes that's missing in my life or their life, where if we could come together and see that yes, you just created an amazing relationship that will be 10 times stronger if you can do it. However, I think a yes can always be found, and there's going to be, it depends on how much time. Do you want to put in 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 months, 10 years? That's up to you. And depending on how much resistance we have, there's something in business I learned about from a teacher named Allison Armstrong called positive resistance. Positive resistance is when somebody says, hey, Brandon, that's not the best idea you've ever had. Have you thought about doing it this way? Or, I think that we're all going to have moments, especially right now with tensions being high, politics the way they are all around the world. You're going to have people who are more reactive. And the question you have to ask yourself is, how much of this is on me, how much of it is on them, and what amount of work am I willing to personally put into this to have it work? And the amount of work that you're willing to put into it is going to equal how successful or not successful you are. And whether you stay for 10 minutes, 10 days, 10 months, 10 years, that's going to depend on you and whether or not you want to put the time and energy in to have it work.
Yeah, that's a great point, to not bail when it gets too serious, to stick it out. And it gets into a really good point that we've talked about previously about the idea that your best friends are just people you've had conflict or friction with over time. And those are your best colleagues, those are sometimes your best bosses. That's so often in life too, right? You see this in high school, you see some bosses. I had a boss that couldn't stand when, I've worked at 5 recruiting firms when I was a recruiter in our lifetime. So any one of these bosses could be the bad one, but there was one that I just didn't see eye to eye with. And I remember seeing her later on when I found my way into recruiting, and she had tears in her eyes. And I went, what's going on? She goes, you just finally found what you're meant to do. And to this day, like I have love for that person. I probably told this story too before, but I do think it's really important about getting the job. When I graduated law school, it was like 2004, 3, economy bounced back. Everyone was getting jobs. You couldn't not get a job, and I wasn't getting hired. And I didn't look that hard, but I wasn't getting hired. And I went into my favorite professor. This professor's, I think his Professor Conklin was the name, but he taught a class called counseling negotiation. And I walked up to him, and he'd written me an email at the end of the year. And he said, every year there's one student I believe in that I know is going to do something great. And this year that's you. And I went up to like, I would, as friends with everyone, a lot of people in my law school, I said, did you get this email? Like, no, Brandon, we didn't get the email. But nonetheless, so I go up to him, and then at graduation, he comes up to me, he goes, beeline to me, he goes, Brandon, did you get my email? I said, yes, thank you. It meant the world to me. And then and I was dreading this question. He goes, what job are you going to do? Where are you going? I went, you've been on the wrong person. I don't have a job. Every single one of my friends has a job. And he goes, no, I didn't. That's the great news. I love that news. I said, why? He looks at me dead in the eye and he gives me some of the best advice I ever got. He said, because that means you're not doing what you hate. Until I spent 8 years doing what I hated. Really well, until I found this beautiful, I can't believe it's a job still to this day, work that I do now. I didn't know how brilliant that was. That was such great advice. He just took this, like, the ultimate shame, the ultimate pain, this ultimate moment of doubt, and I can never get his damn advice out of my head for 13 years until it was like, he's right. What if I just didn't do what I hated? Is it that I hate when it's that simple? I just hate it. If that's it, that's what it takes to be happy. Don't do what you hate. But great advice. What a magical man. Non sequitur, just on the idea of levity or positivity. I wrote him years later, and I said some version of that story. And he said, I was just sitting here having an existential crisis around what it was all worth. I was just in my head writing a book or something. And he goes, this email came at the right time. Make someone laugh. Tell them you love them. Share something. We're all going through our own BS. And if you can just, for one moment, take out the rain clouds, add a little sun. Boy, what a gift. Been doing a lot of noise today. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I think that that's such good advice, Brandon. I think right now, with the uncertainty a lot of people are facing around the world, wherever people might be tuning in from or whatever time people are tuning in from, I don't think there's ever been a period in history, by the way, where we've all had perfect certainty, where the whole world is like, everybody is fed. There's enough healthcare for everybody, unless you live in Denmark. I was talking to somebody about that today, where you have like unlimited healthcare, free housing if you need it. By the way, you can't move there because for this very reason, they're the happiest place in the world. But, there's always going to be some sort of uncertainty in our life. Where is the next job? Will they like me? Will he or she stay with me? Whatever that might look like. And just know that whatever you're going through, it is for your good. I remember one of my teachers, Mark Golston, said the question, I think it's a famous question from somebody else, Einstein maybe, that you want to ask yourself is, do I live in a kind universe? Do I live in a kind universe? And your answer to that shapes and shifts your whole reality. Either yes, you live in a kind and trustworthy universe, or no, you don't, and everybody's out to get you. And to Brandon's point of like, oh my gosh, I screwed up at the wedding, I said the wrong thing, or I didn't say what I meant to say. What if you lived in a kind and trusting universe? What if being fired from that job is the greatest gift that you're ever going to get, or that person who you thought was the one broke up with you? When I tell people this, whether it's a bad relationship, not bad, a relationship that doesn't work out, or a job that doesn't work out, imagine that you get fired after 5 or 10 years, or you get out of that relationship after 20 years. You could have spent another 20 years with somebody in something where you weren't fulfilled or they weren't. What a gift that the person tells you how it really is rather than misrepresenting it to you.
I love that. That's actually when, unfortunately, the way, especially the way my mother had passed away was so tragic, and it took me a year to heal. And I love, in a weird way, being the first one to call someone now as we get older and people's parents die. One of the first people who calls and said, no one's going to tell you this, but you're going to have superpower. He's going to make it hurt long. But there's going to come a day where you laugh louder than you've ever laughed. The sun is going to be brighter than it's ever been. And no one tells you this when someone dies. No one tells you when you get fired. No one tells you on your worst day that ultimate pain makes the sun that much more beautiful, that much better. And I don't wish anyone pain. But if I learned anything in life, if you're going to experience it, you might as well use it, for God's sakes. And that's true for our jobs. That's true for getting us to where we're going to be, whatever it is. And we're going to get through this. As I think it was Churchill, if you're going through hell, keep going. Damn, what a choice you got.
I love that, Brandon. Well, we're running out of time here. So if you want to maybe wrap it up, I know you're so good with coming up with our three.
I know, I'm struggling today. Let's see. Don't take yourself too seriously.
Yes.
Don't I'm not gonna do it now. Don't take yourself too seriously. Inject, if you're a boss, inject humor. If you're an employee, inject humor. And for God's sakes, if you're going on an interview, you can't screw it up. And guess what? I think this is great for levity. If you didn't get that big job, or you didn't get that dream person, you might not be doing what you hate. And until you do what you hate, believe me, you are lucky. So I wish you what you love. But in the meantime, if at the very least you're not doing what you hate, then you're ahead of the game.
Beautiful, Brandon. Thank you so
That's
much.
what I got. There's no like really concise 3-1.
Yeah, and I think the third one, I'm going to throw one more in, is look for the yes. Always look for the mutual yes. And I think that if we can all look for the mutual yes while being authentic, having a sense of humor and that lightness and levity and being ourselves in it and just riding the wave in the direction it's going, life will be fulfilling and you'll have surprising success in your career. So have fun with it, guys. And thanks so much for everybody who tuned in today. And it may get messy. My goal is to make mistakes, get messy, and that's where this all started from. And that's part of doing these shows. It's not about getting it right. We're doing the best that we can up here. And you may think that we can do it better, in which case email us at getyourselfthejob@gmail.com or leave us messages on our Get Yourself the Job on Facebook or on our iTunes. And that's the only way that we can give you more of what you want. You might be sitting there cursing, Brandon and Jennifer, I really wanted interview tips today. And here you are talking about levity. Hopefully you got a couple interview tips out of it. But, communicate. That's one of the other great gifts. We could do a whole show, I'm sure we will, on communication. So please continue to tune in, join us. Any closing thoughts, Brandon?
I do. A PSA for any listeners. I love to listen to podcasts on double speed. I speak at like quadruple speed. I recognize that. I'm going to work on slowing it down. As I used to tell audiences, I'll probably fail, but I'm going to work on it. You're going to work on your A's. I'm going to work on slowing down. And if you can listen to at 1.5 speed, I'm going to celebrate. So that's my future goal. My own.
I love that. I'm with you, Brandon. I feel like there's always so much information. My old business coach years ago said, Jen, listening to you is like drinking out of a fire hose. So Brandon, I think we both need to scale back on the fire hose energy so people can absorb what we're saying. So thank you.
Next week, we got a great guest.
Yeah. Thanks so much, guys. Follow us on iTunes. Check us out on LA Talk Radio on the Facebook page. And coming soon will be the YouTube page as well for Get Yourself the Job. So we're excited to share that.
Thank you.
Have a great week.
You're listening to Get Yourself the Job with Jennifer Hill and Brandon Maslan, only on LA Talk Radio.